everybody, welcome to another Grass River microclass. My name's Emily and I'm out here today near Finch Creek on a kind of wet and very cold day, but it's great weather for what we're going to be checking out today, which is lichen. And first what I want to talk about is what exactly is lichen, and then we're going to learn about the three different growth forms, three main growth forms that lichen can take, and we'll talk about some lichen fun facts at the end. So first let's talk about what exactly lichen is. Spoiler alert, you might already know this, but lichen is not a plant. It's not even actually a single organism. It's a partnership between two different organisms, always between a fungus and an alga, which is just the singular form for algae. And it's a symbiotic relationship, which means that both parties benefit from forming this partnership. And so the algae allows the fungus to gather energy that it would not normally be able to get. So normally fungus gets energy from decomposing things, but the algae is able to photosynthesize. And so that makes by partnering with algae, then the fungus is able to take advantage of the photosynthesis and the sugars that are created from that. And so the fungus is able to eat in a different way. And for the algae, the fungus provides it with sort of like a structure and protection so that the algae is able to live in environments that it would never be able to live in normally. And really what happens is that the algae sort of lives on the surface of the fungus, but the fungus forms what's called a cortex, or a shell, right over the algae, so it really protects it from harmful UV rays. And this allows this great partnership allows fungus and algae together as lichen to exist all over the world in all different sorts of habitats. In North America, we have 3,600 types of lichen, and they exist everywhere from rainforests to deserts to even alpine tundra. All right, so now let's start looking at what lichen looks like in practice in the field, where we can find it. And you can find it really on a lot of surfaces, especially old surfaces, so it has time to establish. So it can be found on the soil, on tree bark, on old buildings, on boulders and rocks, a lot of different places. This is obviously growing on the bark of a tree. This is probably the type of lichen, some type of green shield lichen, but I'm not exactly sure because lichen can be pretty hairy to identify. But this is definitely a great example of the first of our three major types of growth forms that lichen takes. This is a great example of the foliose growth form, and that just means that there are two distinct sides to the lichen. So we can see that this side right here, it's kind of like a leaf, and you can flip it over and it looks very different underneath, and that's because the algae is really only hanging out on the top layer because that's where it's going to get the sunlight to photosynthesize. But underneath, you're really just seeing right into that fungus layer because algae doesn't need to hang out in the shadows. Okay, so foliose, lichen, let's check out two other growth forms. So that foliose lichen we just looked at, I should mention that that type of growth form can be really flat, or it can have a lot of bumps and ridges in it. The one we were looking at was kind of in between. Now I want to look at our second growth form. This is called fruticose. And it's different from foliose in that it doesn't have two distinct sides. It has algae growing all the way around it, and so it can either be kind of like take a shrubby upright form like these ones we're going to take a closer look at, or it can be sort of hair-like and pendant, like hanging down. So these cute little guys, this fruticose lichen is called British soldiers, and it's called that because they've got these cute little red caps on top, like British soldiers back in the day. And this is growing on just a really old post right near the start of the rail trail. And you can see that it really does come up in sort of these spike or club-like structures. So there's not clearly two sides. That's what makes it fruticose. And you might notice that it looks quite bright today, these colors. And that is because all lichen will actually look brighter in the rain or right after a rain whenever there's moisture in the air, because lichen is actually, it dries out and is dormant when there is not enough water for the algae to be able to photosynthesize. But when there is enough water for the algae to be able to make those sugars from sunlight, then the cortex, that shell that we talked about that the fungus provides on top of the algae to protect it, those cells in the cortex actually become transparent to allow the sunlight to come through, and so the algae can photosynthesize. So on days like today when there's enough moisture in the air, you can really see the bright colors of the algae underneath that cortex shell. And so lichen is a great thing to look for on rainy days like today. All right, here's our final growth form of lichen. This is called crustose lichen, and it really does just form a sort of crust. Here's an example of it. Here's a different kind, and this kind is often the most colorful. Often you'll see this as sort of like a mustard yellow like this one, or even bright oranges. And this kind often grows on boulders like this example, but also on roof shingles and even soil, especially in deserts. So I wanted to close out today's video with some lichen fun facts. So first of all, some species of lichen are actually edible. Many indigenous people eat lichen in a genus called Bryoria. But some lichen is actually quite toxic, even fatal. There's a species of lichen called wolf lichen that's endemic to the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rocky Mountains. That has been historically used both in Europe and the US, because it's also endemic to Europe, as a way to poison wolves and other carnivorous predators that settlers did not want on the landscape. So there's a chemical in this type of lichen called volcanic acid that is toxic, and settlers would stuff old reindeer or any sort of ungulate carcasses with this lichen, and the wolves or whatever predator would end up consuming some of it, and it was fatal. Nowadays, lichen, on a happier note, is used in a lot of manufactured products like deodorant and toothpaste and antibiotic drugs. It's also used as a clothing dye. You can get all sorts of colors of dye from, depending on which species of lichen you use, everything from brown to green to more unusual things like orange and purple. And let's see, lichen also is also really important for several environmental reasons. First of all, it is an excellent indicator of air quality, actually, because lichens have no roots. You know, remember, they're not plants. They have no roots, and so everything that they take in through the air. So their water they're taking in through the air, their nutrients, and anything else that happens to be in the air, like toxic metals or other sorts of pollution. So lichen will store those heavy metals or other toxins in their tissues, and then scientists can actually sort of biopsy the lichens to see what the levels of air pollution in that area might be. And also, in general, the more lichens that are around and the healthier they look, the better the air quality probably is in that area. Let's see, lichen is also an important food source for several kinds of animals. Most notably, the best known example is reindeer lichen is an incredibly important source of winter forage for caribou populations in North America. They'll paw at the ground and to get under the snow to eat the lichen, which is really the only living, growing thing often and during those times of year. Oh, one last thing is that lichen is a super important agent in weathering rocks. And this is the process of rocks breaking back down into minerals and in soil. And often the fungus, if a lichen is growing on a rock, the fungus will release chemicals that sort of chemically break down the rock. So it's an important agent for that too. All right, so that was a lot of information. I hope you guys learned something about lichen. Hope you're liking the lichen. I had to throw that joke in there. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Bye.